Imagine looking out the window of an airplane. You are cruising at 21,000 feet. The seatbelt sign is on. The coffee in your tray is shaking slightly. Suddenly, a bolt of white light blinds you. The sound of tearing metal screams in your ears, louder than anything you have ever heard. And then, silence. The plane is gone. The passengers are gone. You are still strapped into your seat, but you are no longer inside an aircraft. You are free falling through the clouds, alone. This is not a scene from a Hollywood movie. On Christmas Eve 1971, this was the terrifying reality for a 17-year-old girl named Juliane Koepcke. She fell 2 miles from the sky into the deadliest jungle on Earth. She had no food. She had no survival gear. She was injured and alone in a green hell, infested with jaguars, caimans, and deadly insects. Statistically, she should have died on impact. If not the fall, the jungle should have killed her within 24 hours. But Juliane Koepcke didn't just survive, she walked out. This is the story of the girl who fell from the sky and her battle against the odds. To understand how this nightmare began, we go back to the morning of December 24, 1971, in Lima, Peru. The airport was chaotic. It was Christmas Eve, and everyone was trying to get home. Among the crowd were Maria Koepcke, a renowned ornithologist, and her daughter, Juliane. They were heading to Koepcke, a city deep in the Amazon rainforest, to meet Juliane's father, Hans, for Christmas. They had booked tickets on LANSA Flight 508. Now, LANSA did not have the best reputation. They had already lost 2 planes in recent years due to mechanical failure and pilot error. Juliane's father had even begged them not to fly with this airline. He urged them to wait for a safer option. But it was the holidays, and Flight 508 was the only one available. Juliane had just graduated from high school the day before, and they were eager to be together as a family. So, against better judgment, they boarded the Lockheed Electra turboprop. The flight was scheduled to take about an hour. The first 30 minutes were smooth. Juliane was sitting in window seat 19F. She was happy, watching the Peruvian landscape pass below. But as they approached the Andes Mountains, the sky turned an ominous shade of black. Massive thunderheads were building up ahead. The pilots made a fatal error. Instead of flying around the massive storm front or turning back, they decided to fly through it to stay on schedule for Christmas. It was a decision that would cost 91 people their lives. Turbulence hit the plane like a hammer. The aircraft was tossed around violently. Luggage fell from the overhead bins. Wrapped Christmas presents slid down the aisle. Outside the window, lightning flashed continuously, illuminating the dark clouds. Juliane held her mother's hand tightly. Her mother, usually calm, looked at her and said, "I don't like this." Then, at 21,000 feet, disaster struck. A bolt of lightning hit the right wing's fuel tank. Juliane remembers a blinding white light and a deafening explosion. The plane didn't just crash. It disintegrated in mid-air. The right wing was torn off. The fuselage broke apart under the immense aerodynamic stress. One moment, she was sitting next to her mother. The next, she was spinning in the open air. The noise of the engines was replaced by the rushing wind. She was still strapped to her seat, tumbling through the air, falling toward the canopy of the Amazon rainforest 2 miles below. She saw the green jungle spinning beneath her like a broccoli head. The G-force caused her to lose consciousness. Juliane woke up the next morning. It was raining. She was lying in the mud, still strapped to her row of 3 seats. She looked up at the dense canopy of trees above her. Sunlight was filtering through the leaves. She was alive. It is a mystery of physics how she survived a fall of 10,000 feet. Experts later analyzed the crash and believed the row of seats acted like a helicopter seat, spinning and slowing her descent. The thick jungle canopy also broke her fall, and a massive updraft from the storm may have cushioned the impact. It was a one-in-a-million miracle. But her miracle came with a heavy price. She had a broken collarbone, a deep gash on her right arm. Her right eye was swollen shut, and worst of all, she had lost her glasses. Juliane was severely nearsighted. The world around her was a blur of green and brown shapes. She unbuckled herself and stood up, shaky and disoriented. Her first thought wasn't about pain. It was about her mother. She called out, "Mama, Mama," over and over again, but the only answer was the sound of frogs, rain, and the buzzing of insects. She scanned the area as best she could with her blurred vision. She found a bag of candy that had fallen from the plane. It was the only food she would have for the entire journey. She was dressed in a sleeveless mini-dress and one sandal. She had lost the other shoe in the fall. This was not jungle gear. This was summer clothing, completely unsuitable for the harsh environment of the Amazon. She began to walk. She knew she had to find help, but the Amazon is not just a forest. It is a green maze designed to kill you. The heat was suffocating. The humidity was almost 100%. The insects were relentless. Clouds of mosquitoes and biting flies swarmed her open wounds. She found bodies of other passengers scattered in the forest. They were still strapped into their seats, but unlike her, they had hit the ground with fatal force. The sight was horrific. She realized with a sinking heart that she was likely the only survivor. Juliane was young, but she had an advantage. Her parents were scientists who lived in the jungle. She had spent time at their research station. She remembered a piece of advice her father had given her years ago. If you get lost in the jungle, find a stream. Follow the stream to a river. Follow the river to a bigger river. Humans live on the water. So she started listening. She ignored the sounds of the birds and monkeys and focused on finding the sound of trickling water. On the third day, she found a small creek. She stepped into the water and began to walk downstream. This was dangerous. The water was home to stingrays, electric eels, and caimans. But it was her only map. Walking in the water was also easier than hacking through the dense undergrowth on the banks. Days turned into a week. The bag of candy ran out. Hunger became a sharp pain in her stomach, then a dull ache. She drank river water to stay alive, knowing it might be full of parasites, but she had no choice. The jungle was taking its toll. Her wounds were infected. The deep cut on her arm had attracted flies. They had laid eggs in the wound. Maggots were now hatching and eating her flesh from the inside out. The pain was excruciating. She could feel the moving under her skin. It was a psychological torture as much as a physical one. She began to hallucinate. She saw rescue planes flying high above the canopy, but the trees were too thick. They couldn't see the tiny girl waving from the river below. She realized that no one was coming for her. She was on her own. By the 10th day, she could barely stand. She was drifting in and out of consciousness. Her body was shutting down. She drifted in the water because walking was too exhausting. She saw crocodiles sliding into the water near her, but she was too tired to be afraid. She remembered her father telling her that crocodiles usually don't attack humans unless provoked. So she swam past them, too weak to care if they attacked.
On the 11th day, Juliane saw something that she thought was another hallucination. A boat. A small wooden boat tied to the riverbank. She touched it. The wood was rough and solid. It was real.
Near the boat was a small hut. It was empty, but inside she found a can of gasoline. Juliane remembered how her father treated infections on their dog back at the research station. He used kerosene or gasoline to suffocate the maggots. She poured the gasoline directly onto her open, maggot-infested wound. The pain was blinding. It felt like liquid fire being poured into her arm. She screamed in agony. But it worked. The maggots tried to escape the gasoline, wriggling out of her arm. She pulled dozens of them out with her fingers, one by one. It was a gruesome task, but it saved her arm from gangrene. She spent the night in the hut, terrified that the owners wouldn't return or that they would be hostile. The next morning, she heard voices of men. 3 Peruvian lumberjacks walked out of the forest. When they saw her, they stopped in their tracks, looking terrified. Juliane looked like a ghost. Her eyes were bloodshot, her skin was pale and covered in bites, and she was skeletal. She looked more like a forest spirit than a human being. She spoke to them in Spanish, her voice weak and cracking. "I am a girl who is in the LANSA crash. My name is Juliane." The men gave her food and treated her wounds. They were kind to her. The next day, they took her down the river to a village where she was flown to a hospital. After 11 days in the jungle, against impossible odds, Juliane Koepcke was safe. Juliane was reunited with her father in an emotional scene at the hospital. But the news wasn't all good. Search teams eventually found the crash site based on Juliane's information. Out of 91 people on board, Juliane was the sole survivor. Her mother had survived the initial fall, but was badly injured and unable to move. She had passed away days later, alone in the jungle, while Juliane was fighting her way down the river. Juliane's survival remains one of the greatest stories of human resilience in history. She didn't have survival gear. She didn't have a weapon. She had knowledge, and she had the will to keep moving when everything told her to lie down and die. Later in life, Juliane returned to the jungle. She became a biologist, just like her parents. She studied the very forest that had taken her mother but spared her life. Her story teaches us that even when the sky falls and we are left with nothing, hope is the one thing we must never let go of. Nature is indifferent to our suffering, but the human spirit is capable of overcoming the most terrifying obstacles.